Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Education on the Breadline conference. It's a very snowy morning here in the northwest. I hope it's not as snowy where you are. I'm Jonathan Glazard, and I'm Professor of Teacher Education at Edge Hill University, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleagues and co-chairs, Dr. Michelle Jamin, Dr. Amy Quickfall, and Dr. Anthea Rose. In fact, I'm just going to ask my colleagues to just do a brief introduction to themselves. So shall we start with Michelle?
Hello everyone, and good morning. It's very rainy here in Surrey, so I think we've got the whole gambit of weather across the country. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Michelle Jamin. I'm a lecturer and a researcher at the University of Roehampton, and I have been a co-member and convener of the British Educational Research, Mental Health, Wellbeing and Education SIG, along with my colleagues since 2018 now, I believe. So
thank you, Michelle. Okay, Dr. Amy Quickfall.
Thank you, Professor Glazard. Hi everyone, I'm Amy. I'm Head of School for Teacher Education at Leeds Trinity, and most of my research focuses on wellbeing, particularly of teacher trainees. I've been a member of the SIG. I think I'm probably the youngest member. I'm sure many of you in the meeting have been in the SIG for longer than me. Quite a newbie, but I'm very pleased to be here and very happy and excited to hear what everybody's got to share today.
Thank you, Amy. Very pleased to have you as well in the SIG. And Dr. Anthea Rose.
Morning, everyone. I'm in snowy East Midlands, Nottinghamshire, which is very unusual for this part of the country. I'm a research fellow at Lincoln University at the moment, working on the Uni Connect project, if any of you have come across that. So I do the evaluation for Link Higher up this end of the country, and I'm very much looking forward to what everyone's got to say this morning.
Thank you, Anthea. And we've got a whole suite of really interesting and exciting presentations, which I'm really looking forward to. So just to kick the conference off, just to give some context then. So there's been a 77% rise in the number of children needing specialist treatment, specialist mental health treatment, which is, it's a massive increase in the number of children needing to be referred to specialist services. There's been a dramatic rise in the number of referrals to mental health services since 2017, and we've got evidence that children felt trapped during lockdown. So we know that anxiety remains a significant problem in schools, colleges and university. Many children, young people and students are presenting signs of anxiety, and that's an ongoing problem. However, Anthea sent me some research this morning, which suggests that at a population level, so across the whole population, studies show a high level of resilience across the population during COVID. So that's interesting. We know that numbers of children and young people have increased. Numbers of children and young people with poor mental health have increased since COVID, from 1 in 10 to 1 in 6, but actually at population level, studies are showing there was a high level of resilience during COVID. And then just to give more context then, so 2022-23, we've got the financial crisis, we've got many families experiencing financial hardship, the increased costs in living, the energy costs, the costs of food. Schools are also struggling with very, very tight budgets, and also increased energy costs, which is placing massive pressure on schools. So it's a very challenging time. And just to give you a little bit more context, so I was in a school last week in the northeast, and I'm just going to describe the context of this school. So the school was in an area of significant social deprivation. The signs of poverty actually were everywhere. So there were people begging on the streets, boarded up shops, evidence of addiction, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, etc. And it was really, really clear that the children had challenging backgrounds. The children coming into school found it really difficult to regulate their emotions, their feelings. And the children that I spoke to talked to me about the challenges in their lives. They talked about their experience of neglect. Some of them talked to me about their experiences of witnessing domestic abuse. Really challenging backgrounds for those children. And they talked to me about the lack of opportunities within their community as well. However, what I want to just talk about, what I really want to focus on is what the school was doing to support those children. So the school had fantastic nurture provision. So it had nurture provision for children in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. It had separate provision for children who were learning English as an additional language, because there'd been a massive increase in the number of second language learners coming in. And I went into the nurture provision, and what I saw was just phenomenal. It was just amazing. So I saw children playing together, socializing, collaborating, regulating their emotions. And the school told me that actually some of the children had to spend quite a significant amount of time in that nurture provision before they could be reintegrated back into their normal classrooms. Some children were spending 2 terms or even 3 terms in that nurture provision. And eventually, when they were ready to be reintegrated, there was a big celebration event for them to be reintegrated back into their classrooms. What I saw in that school, so despite the challenges within that community, despite the poverty, despite the challenging backgrounds, the children were calm, the children were regulated, the children were polite, respectful, and they really valued what the school was doing for them. So the school had got really rich nurture provision. The school had got breakfast clubs, which were very well attended. The school had set up a food bank for parents. And the school ensured that through its curriculum, children had a really rich curriculum. They had visits to theatres, museums, galleries, and in music, they were learning about Beethoven, Mozart. They were really developing that cultural capital through the curriculum. They were learning languages from the early years, which was fabulous. And then I spoke to the parents, and the parents felt frustrated by the cutbacks to education services, health services, and social care. And many of them spoke to me about how long it was taking to actually get support for their child. They were really frustrated. Many of the parents also had poor mental health themselves, and the school was doing its best to support the parents' mental health as well as the mental health of children. And the school was actually putting on parental workshops to support parents with their mental health. And when I spoke to the parents also, the parents really valued that support from the school. But what I heard actually was not stories of tragedy from those parents, but actually stories of resilience. So they were leading challenging lives, but they were absolutely resilient. Their spirits had not been broken. Okay, so, and I think that's really important, that actually, despite the challenges, they still had that resilience, they still had that fight, they still had that spirit, and they actually wanted a better life for their children. And that's why they really valued what the school was doing, and they really valued education. You can't break people's spirits when they're passionate about education. Okay, so what are the solutions? Well, we'll hear some of the solutions today in the presentation, but we actually need proper, real investment, real financial investment in schools and within services, within education, within health, within social care. You know, there hasn't been enough investment, has there? We also need a system that rewards schools for investing in mental health. So this school was fabulous. It was amazing. And in my view, it was doing the best it could in a very challenging context. So there were some issues with attainment. So attainment wasn't where it needed to be, but actually the school couldn't have done any better, because when we looked at the very low starting points of some of those children, the school could not have done any better. It was providing a fabulous service for those children, and all of those children were fully included, and actually it was transforming their lives. We need leadership teams who invest in things like nurture, mental health and well-being. And then we need a curriculum that promotes real cultural capital that will give children opportunities to better their lives. We need evidence-based interventions that will support children's mental health and well-being, and we're going to hear about some of those today. And we need CPD for teachers, and we need better teacher education that really addresses some of these key challenges I think that schools are now facing within this challenging context. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. So I'm going to introduce Brona Hughes, and Brona's going to talk about pyramid clubs, low cost, high impact interventions. So Brona is from the University of West London, and in 2001 was recruited by the National Pyramid Trust to work on the pyramid model of intervention. I don't know anything about the pyramid model, so I'm really excited to hear about this. Brona also supports statutory and voluntary sector organisations. Okay, thank you everyone. Over to Brona.
Okay, good morning and thank you very much for having me. I hope the slides are going to work well today, but it's nice to be here. So I think there are two key messages I want you to take away from this today. And one is something Jonathan's already mentioned. He talked about nurture and groups. And I think we need to recognise that group work is a very cost-effective method of supporting many children in school. So not always to assume that because you're anxious, you need a one-to-one counsellor. So that's one of the key things. And the other thing is about the use of external resources, because we know school staff are very overstretched. So what I'm going to talk about, sorry, I just new to this mode of doing it, can have a quick look at the role of schools in supporting mental health, which hopefully you're all very aware of, but I think it's a useful place to start to remind ourselves why we're doing this. I'm going to talk, and Jonathan will know all about pyramid clubs by the end of it. I'm going to tell you what they are and what they're not. And I'm going to share with you how it works. I'm going to go through some of the research and the evidence base for it, because as Jonathan says, it is really important that we're using evidence-based interventions. You might recognise some of the names on the research, but we'll cover that when we come to it. And I'm going to tell you how we set up pyramid clubs in schools, including the cost, because I don't know about you, but I feel very frustrated sometimes when I go onto websites and they don't actually put the costs on there. So I'm going to be upfront and tell you what it all costs. So why do we need to be supporting children's mental health in school? Well, I'll not go through this in detail because I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but what we know is that there was already a big problem with children's mental health. We know from previous surveys, and all the data is there. So by the time COVID hit, we were already at 1 in 8 children displaying signs for mental health disorder in schools. A lot of the more recent data is based on England, but we expect that the other countries in the UK are probably the same. I don't know whether we have anybody on the session today who's not from England, but I expect it is much the same. And the UK is sort of in line with UN figures anyway. But of course, since COVID, the position has really deteriorated drastically. But talking to schools, they're saying to me it wasn't just COVID that caused this. It was already on an upward trajectory even before COVID struck. So now we're looking at something like 1 in 6 children. And it's interesting, Jonathan was just saying about research on resilience. A lot of children under COVID experienced deterioration in their mental health, but some did experience an improvement in the mental health. But it's interesting that it's the older children that seem to have suffered the most, and particularly those with eating disorders. There seems to have been a huge rise in eating disorders. I'm not quite sure what lies behind that. I've seen theories about children sitting at home eating, and because I think when we hear the word eating disorder, we automatically assume anorexia, but actually a lot of the problems with eating are either faddy eating a limited range of stuff, or overeating, and a lot of children are being referred for support for that, and that's really difficult. Oh, sorry, I'm using a touchpad and I'm too heavy on it. And sleep is a big issue, and we know that children who don't sleep well find it very, very difficult to manage in school. So who are the children who are most at risk? Girls. We know that girls particularly suffer with emotional disorders and eating disorders, although boys do as well. Children who are in the LGBTQ plus categories tend to suffer more. Interesting that white British children have higher levels of all disorders compared to some others, and I wonder how much of that is underdiagnosis rather than the fact that they don't, or is it about the culture in other communities that protects those children? I work a lot in a London borough, and we certainly have a lot of Asian children in our groups, but then we have a very big Asian population, so not sure cause and effect there. Socioeconomic, we know children who are poorer, and Jonathan's already mentioned some of the stresses on families if they're struggling to survive financially, and children pick that up. We had year 5 children, when we asked them what they thought about the future a couple of weeks ago, they're really worried because they're very conscious that prices are going up and what that means for their families. And of course, those who are from families that are not functioning well for all sorts of reasons, particularly where the parents have mental health problems, and those children who have physical disabilities, neurodisabilities, and neurodevelopmental issues. So why are we doing this in school? Wrong way around. Current policy in English schools, and I'm sure, again, those of you who work in schools are very aware of this. We had the Green Paper in 2017. We should have mental health support teams. It'd be very interesting to hear from the people on this call about their experiences of mental health support teams. I don't know if you've seen, but the University of Birmingham issued a preliminary report a couple of weeks ago about the Trailblazers, the first MHSTs that were being rolled out. I have to say my experience of them so far has not been entirely positive. I had great hopes that this was going to solve a lot of the problems for children's mental health, but it doesn't seem to have happened. So it'll be interesting when we get to the discussion later on to see whether other people have had more positive experience. So mental health support teams, every school to have a senior mental health lead, and a target in some areas to reduce the CAMHS waiting list. And again, I'm going into schools where sometimes there is a senior mental health lead. Sometimes they've even been trained, because the problem was that the mental health support teams and the training for senior mental health leads should have come in just as COVID hit, so everything was badly delayed. But I'm finding that in primary schools particularly, that senior mental health lead is very often has a class-based role as well, so doesn't actually have the time they need. But school is a good place for social change. It's always been somewhere where things have been tested out. In the past, we still have free school meals. We used to have free school milk. We have fruit for younger children. And even if you think back to 2020 and Marcus Rashford and insisting that children get free school meals during the holidays and when they're not in school. So it is a good place to address some of these social and financial issues. And school staff need to manage behaviour and get the children into school if they're going to teach them. So anything that we can do that improves attendance and readiness for learning has to be important. And we know from research again that if we address those social and emotional needs, we can improve academic outcomes. Oops, sorry, I'm really heavy-handed with this pad and it's jumping on me. So I want to tell you a little bit about pyramids. Clearly, I'm biased because I've been working with pyramid clubs for a very long time, but they do meet a very specific need. I'm not suggesting they're the answer to every problem, and they are very cost effective, but with the usual caveats that they need to be done properly. And I'll explain what I mean by done properly. So what are pyramid clubs all about? They're about two key aspects, two things that children really, really need if they're going to succeed in life. One is about friendships and feeling part of a peer group, and the other is about improving their confidence. So I started a pyramid club yesterday in a school with year 7 children, and we've got in the same school last year, it was the same, interestingly, a child with the same name. We've got a selective mute. We had 2 girls in another group who are selective mutes. So if children don't feel confident to speak up in school, they are missing out on so much. And if they don't feel part of a peer group, it can very often become a habit that they get into, that they withdraw from their peers and they don't get the support that they could be getting from that peer group. So what we're trying to do through the clubs, the problems we're trying to address, and I'm sure again you're very familiar with this, is that children who are unhappy or anxious or worried find it difficult to concentrate. We know what it's like as adults when you've got something on your mind. It's very difficult to take in information, and in schools, the children who don't ask for help often don't get it. So the children who kick off and cause disruption in the classroom, something has to be done about those. But the group we work with tend to be the quieter children who very often don't ask for help. And I explain this when I'm training people to run pyramid clubs. I'll say, if you move on as a teacher in a classroom and you're doing some complicated, I don't know, long division, the child who is confident, who doesn't get it, will say, Miss, you didn't explain that very well. I don't get that. You didn't explain it properly. Whereas the child who lacks confidence will say, it's me, it's my fault. I'm stupid. Keep my head down. Don't ask questions. Hopefully nobody will notice. But of course, they don't learn in the process, do they? Children who are happier and healthier stay in education longer and they do better academically. If we can intervene early, it means that the problems are hopefully less severe, and they might never go on to develop, to need any further help apart from this short-term intervention that they get at the beginning of their problems. And there is a moral issue here as well, because I go into schools a lot as well, and I speak to school staff who say there are just so many children who need help and they need different sorts of help, but we can't always offer the help that we need to all of them. But if we can do something, shouldn't we be doing something? So what does this pyramid intervention look like? Well, there is an evidence base for it. So it is a proven intervention. We intervene early in the children's lives. So we don't wait until they've got a huge problem. We don't wait until they have to be referred to CAMHS. We are trying to intervene much earlier because we think you can provide you can provide the support at a much lower cost if you intervene early, and you can avoid some of the downstream costs, which are likely to be a lot more. It's a group work intervention, and we work with children between the ages of 7 to 14. So normally in a school, we would work with a single year group or perhaps adjacent year groups. So as I explained to schools, whereas the younger children quite often like to be with older children don't really like younger children in their group. So, but it has worked very successfully if we have year 4 and 5 or year 7 and 8. But ideally it would work with a single year group at a time. Delivered either by school staff, and I'll say more about that, or by volunteers. I work at a university and we have a large base of students who are desperate for experience and the opportunity to work in a school setting. So we have a ready flow of volunteers. And I think the important thing about Pyramid is you can train volunteers to run this. They're not claiming to be counsellors, but with the correct training, they can deliver an intervention that has an evidence base. So it's not something that schools need to worry about, these people coming in and will they understand? They do. But from the children's point of view and from the parents' point of view, it's a very low-key intervention. It's a fun thing. There's food. Who wouldn't go if there's food offered? They do games. It doesn't feel like a clinical intervention, but actually there is a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of evidence behind it. The target group for pyramid clubs are children who are quiet, shy, withdrawn, children who are finding friendships difficult. And I've seen a lot more of that post-COVID. I was a school governor for 25 years, mainly in primary schools. And we saw a lot of that with children coming back. They'd sort of got out of the way of getting on with their friends, and they seem to have lost the ability to sort out all those little arguments and friendship issues. But that is so essential for them to be able to do that. And as I say, those who are quiet and anxious very often don't take advantage of other things that schools have to offer. They don't join after school clubs. They don't volunteer to speak at a school assembly or to be part of a school play or join the football team or the choir in school. So what we want to do is try and move those children to a position where they can take advantage of all the other wonderful things that are going on in school. We're also seeing a lot of children who are perhaps undiagnosed with autistic spectrum disorders, particularly girls. So they manage, there's a lot of talk about masking in schools. And when we work with them in a small group, it becomes more obvious. But we know that children who have any sort of physical or neurodevelopmental disability are more likely to have attendant mental health problems as well. We're also uncovering a lot of trauma in children that hasn't been shared with the school. Children change schools, parents don't know about issues like domestic abuse or bereavements or discrimination. So very often these issues come out when we work with children, and that it means then that we're able to signpost them to more targeted support. So what does a pyramid club look like? So that's the overall intervention. So the pyramid club normally runs after school for an hour and a half, once a week for 10 weeks. And 10 weeks seems to be long enough to make a significant change in a child, or if it's not making a change, to be able to better identify what specific support might actually help them. So very often there is trauma there. They do need some one-to-one support. They need bereavement support. Perhaps we're suggesting they need a diagnosis for some sort of learning difficulty. But so it is important that you do these things for long enough for the children to become comfortable, to develop trust in the group, so that they do get to the point where they're happy to share information. And we need long enough sessions each week for the children to come in, to relax and to start to share things, and for us to be able to do that work, because schools are very busy places, and sometimes I find that they want to reduce the amount of time either in the weekly sessions or the number of sessions, and I have to constantly fight against that and say, no, really, it does need to be 90 minutes. We know why it needs to be 90 minutes, and we know why it needs to be 10 weeks. So that's the length of time a pyramid club would run. We'd normally have up to 12 children, 10 to 12 children, because we want to offer the children an opportunity to make friends in the group. And if you don't have enough children there, then you're limiting their choices, aren't you? And with my students, I have the luxury of sending 4 adults to 12 children. So it means if a child is a bit upset one week, there is somebody who's got time to do some one-to-one work with them alongside the group work that's going on. The important thing is that people are trained in advance and they understand why the children behave like they do. And what is lovely about pyramid clubs is the acceptance that children get there. They just, it isn't the same frustration that parents have, that we've been through this situation 100 times, or even in school where we know there are other priorities and teachers that are being held to account for academic success. we have all the time in the world for these children. There's no rush, and it is important that that people are trained in advance so that they can respond in the right way to a situation. Because when I tell you what it's not, you'll understand why that's more important. And it's really good fun. I've spent about £60 this week buying food for children's clubs. They do art and craft. As children get older, they don't get to do enough of this. Or what I find, and my personal experience as a parent, was my daughter, who loved drawing, hated it when she got to the top end of primary school, because everything had to be related to a theory and a style of drawing, rather than just drawing for the sake of drawing. So they get lots of opportunity to do fun things, relaxing things in the group. And even secondary school children really enjoy doing games. You would be surprised, but it's just such a pleasant experience to be there, and nice for the leaders as well. The thing about pyramid clubs is the activities are planned to meet the needs of the group. So each week, whoever's running the club will do some observations, and they'll look at where are we trying to move these children to, so they can pick from a selection of activities the ones that they think are really going to help those children. Circle time is really important as part of that, because a lot of these children don't speak up in class, and they're very anxious, and they don't often listen very well. So they get the opportunity both to listen and to speak up within the pyramid clubs. I'll skip over this. I'm sure you'll get the slides later, but I just wanted to emphasize the difference from school. We let the children choose the name of the group, and they come up with rules, and the rules are always positively framed. So as soon as they say, don't shout, don't run, I go back to them and I say, well, can you tell us what you want us to do and not what you don't want us to do? And it's interesting in schools how much is about what you can't do and not what you can do. So what are they not? So it's a manualized intervention, but it's not a scripted one. So it's not like a PSHE scheme where you've got a workbook where you work through from page 1 to page 20 till you've covered all the topics. It's much more flexible than that. It's not an opportunity to do academic catch up, although we might in our observations make note that children are really struggling with something, but they need somewhere, particularly those who struggle in school, they need somewhere where they can just be accepted for what they are, and not think I'm under pressure to spell this properly or work out, doing their maths. The children, I make it very clear to children that they're not being tested in anything, but we do make observations every week. And it's about offering an experience rather than talking about this is how you can be confident. It's very often we sow the seed in circle time, and children will come back while we're eating or while we're doing craft, and they'll say, that thing we talked about in circle time, that happened to me, or can you tell me more about that? So it is not for all children. It is for it works for all children, but if you mix children who are confident with children who aren't, the children who aren't confident tend to take a back seat. I realise I'm running out of time, so I'll skip on very quickly. There is a lot of research. We are in the Early Intervention Foundation guidebook and on the Scottish Early Intervention framework as well. There is a lot of information on the EWL website. We know the areas that Pyramid Club draws from: positive psychology, from CBT. Michelle Jamin, whose name you may have noticed, when Michelle did her research into Pyramid Clubs in secondary school, she found these things were really important: sense of belonging, feeling heard, the behaviours and the attitudes of the club leaders, and practicing skills in a small environment, which they then take back into the wider school environment. If you want to deliver a Pyramids Club, we do that. We offer them locally to the university, but a lot of you are not going to be anywhere near. But schools can buy in the training and the resources, and there is the manuals that go with it. And what does it cost? If we're charging schools, we charge £900 to deliver a 10-week club for 12 children. So you can work out the maths on that. The training is not expensive at all. It's a 6-hour training for professionals. If you want us to come to you, it's a bit more. You will need to buy in some initial materials. And we do recommend that if you can work as part of a group of schools, it does make it a lot easier. So you'll get the slides, I'm sure, but I need to finish there. There is more information on the website, and there is so I'll stop sharing and let you move on.
Thank you, Bonnet. That was really interesting. I'm sorry to have rushed you there, no. But we're on quite a tight time scale this morning, and I know everybody's time is precious. Does anyone have any questions? Did anyone? Nobody's put anything in the chat. If anyone's got questions for presenters as we go along, do put them in the chat so we can ask them at the end. But I think I just found it a really interesting idea that for once you talk to the children who are the quietest, who don't seek the attention. And I think that's quite important, because when children are confident, they do talk out, and when they're frustrated and angry, they speak out. But the ones in between, they doesn't necessarily mean they're happy just because they're not speaking. And I guess it's all about knowing your own children in your classroom, which is really key important. Well, if anyone's got any questions, then put them in the chat, and we'll come back to them at the end. Is that okay? Has anyone got anything else? No, at this point? That's lovely, thank you. So now I'm going to introduce Naomi Fields. And Naomi is a school teacher of many years, and currently is doing an MSc in psychology at Cambridge, and I've got that wrong, at Roehampton. And she's going to talk about the Book of Beasties and the intervention that they've been doing there with that. And hopefully Naomi's slides are going to work. So we'll hand over to you, Naomi.
Hello. Yes, I'm just going to try to make them work now. Bear with me because it wasn't being straightforward earlier. So
excellent.
You can see that, yes. I'll just make it so that it's a slideshow. Bear with me. Okay, right, you can see that. I'm on. Great. Okay, yes. So I am I'm a secondary school teacher of 17 years. I teach drama, but I've also had kind of pastoral responsibilities in school, so very much kind of involved within that area of supporting resilience, supporting children from a kind of pastoral perspective as they go through the school. So I came to this as part of my psychology studies. Michelle was looking for people to be part of this trial to run this intervention, which technically actually is for primary schools. So I ran this intervention in a primary school last year, and have subsequently also done it in my secondary school with a group of year 7s this year, and it's worked quite well. So it's a card game, and it's called Book of Beasties.
Is it refusing to move on?
Yeah. Wonder why it didn't do that earlier, did it?
It didn't.
Oh dear. Bear with me. I can't even.
Oh,
hang on, right.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah,
you go. Sorry, I'm sorry. I apologise. Okay, so on their website, they Book of Beasties describe themselves as a microcosm of well-being, which I think is a nice description. And they provide evidence-based, psychologist-endorsed mental wellness resources, and they do a whole range of things. They provide a whole range of activities and resources for children. But Book of Beasties is their flagship game, if you like. It's currently been used in up to about 700 schools, used with about 1,200, up to about 1,200 to 1,500 children, and they're continuing to grow actually. And so I was part of this project, which again was looking to kind of continue endorsing it and continuing to get that evidence base for its impact. So it's primarily aimed at Key Stage 2, although, as I said, I'm a secondary school teacher, and I used it with a group of children in Year 7 who were struggling with the transition process. And its whole aim is to destigmatise the conversation around mental health and to normalise it. Right, let's see. Oh. So it's a card game with 10 little characters, and it comes with a booklet which kind of talks you through the whole thing, and each of these characters is a beastie, and again there is a whole story which sets up these beasties that you can tell the children in your kind of introductory session, and each of these beasties has particular features associated with anxiety or depression and all of the most common symptoms that fall underneath those two things, and they are kind of physical, both physical and kind of mental symptoms. And the aim of the game is for the children to collect these beasties by helping them. Essentially, the aim of the game is to help the beasties and suggest ways of helping them. And that whole process is prompted by various action, item and comfort cards as you go along. And what it really does is it really aims to initiate that positive conversation both with them, so between the facilitator and the children, but also between the children, about their thoughts, feelings and the behaviours that go along with those. So it really allows them to explore their emotions. The emphasis very much is on every all emotions being kind of acceptable, for want of a better word, and it empowers them. It kind of aims to empower them to talk about mental health, and it really does gives them a language, it gives them a framework, it gives them a safe space to kind of really explore all of those things. And what is really lovely about it, I think its real strength, is that it has these built into it. We've kind of woven through each of the weeks these opportunities for play-based learning. So there's some yoga, there are some kind of origami type games, and lots of other little activities that are creative and physical, and allow the students or the children to play as they're going along. So the picture on the right is kind of the table set up, and again the booklet that comes with this is very, very good at kind of walking you through it, and I think what I did a half an hour online training session with the creator of the game, and after that, you know, I was good to go. So what happens is players take it in turns to select from the beastie pile, a pile of the pile of blue cards, and they turn over a beastie, and then each beastie has a particular problem. So for example, I've got one here, and it says it's Aki, and it says everyone feels angry at times. Aki is no different. To steady his nerves, he runs a warm bath to rest his muscles, a great way to keep a positive mind. So each of these characters has a particular issue that it may be to do with anxiety or depression. And then they also have a little symbol on the card, and the symbol corresponds with some of the action cards, which are various strategies that can help that beastie. So the idea is that as each player goes round, it's to see whether or not they have got a corresponding strategy that might help that beastie. But within all that, I would very much say don't kind of jump to the strategy or finding the strategy. Don't jump to find the help really quickly. The really important thing is the conversation around that. So you might choose, within that example that I've just given you, you might choose to discuss with the children why people feel angry. Why might Aki feel angry? What might have happened to Aki to make Aki feel angry? How might Aki feel physically? How might that anger be making Aki feel in their tummy, in their head, in their hands? What you will find by kind of giving the children those prompts is that they come back at you with lots and lots of things. And what I tended to do was to begin with in that, first of all, to begin with both in terms of the first couple of weeks, but also in terms of the first 10 to 15 minutes of the session, is to keep the conversation very much about the character. So if you keep it very much focused on the character, then the children feel quite safe to discuss the character. And then as the weeks go on and as the session goes on, you can then change the emphasis slightly to talking about them, or to talking about how their friends might feel. So that enables them to then kind of go through this transference process of applying the techniques to themselves and to their friends, which is really where they start to then build these strategies. So the conversation is really the key thing with the game, and I would just say, just be totally led by the children. Don't limit the conversation at all. And then what the game does is it gives you a focus each week. If you want to play it like this, there's a particular lesson plan for each week, and each week will ask you to focus on a particular character. And what will happen is, if the children turn over the card and get that character, you kind of stop for a little bit longer and you focus on that character, and you can do the activities that are associated with that character. So for example, Popolo is one of the characters. Popolo has a foggy mind and feels very kind of fuzzy in her head. So the conversation would be around why Popolo might feel like that, and then what we can do to kind of help her. I think Popolo is supposed to be a girl, but it doesn't really matter. And so what you can then do at this point is it guides you, that the booklet will guide you to this particular activity, which is an origami one, where the children make these little boats out of paper, and they can do this game where they have to, you put all the boats on the floor and the children lie down on the floor, and they have to do big deep breaths to kind of blow the boat, and you can make it a race, and they absolutely loved it. They really like that activity. So you can do that kind of boat making and boat race, and then you can then take that and start to make that more explicit about what happens when we take big deep breaths, and how that makes us feel, how that helps us to feel energized, how it helps us to feel calmer, and you can then kind of make those explicit links between feeling foggy in your mind, for example, and the benefits of then taking some deep breaths to address that. So that would be how that works. Another example is through the item cards. So as I said, each character has a little symbol that corresponds with an action card. So it may be that, for example, the merry phone, if you had if your symbol corresponded to a merry phone, then each of the actions is then described and explained in the book. And so once you've done your conversation of why the character might be feeling like this particular character, I think for the merry phone, they recommend the merry phone for I can't remember which character it is, but one of the beasties that feels bad about themselves and has quite low self-esteem, doesn't really believe in themselves. So that would then, it guides you to have a go at the merry phone, which I don't know if you can see me, but was one of these. Again, it's an origami activity. I don't know if anyone remembers these from being children, where you can write little positive things on there, and then you play the game, and the idea is that they say positive things about each other, or they do things that are positive that make you feel good, like tell a joke or do a silly walk, or say something nice about somebody else. And so again, that helps to get you into a conversation about how being positive can make us feel, why it's important to try to say positive things about ourselves, why it's important to try to say positive things about other people, how we can help other people feel better by saying nice things about them and by complimenting them. So again, you can see how you start off with an issue, and how the children can start to talk about that, and then you can see how that goes from having an issue and having a problem through to finding some helpful strategies for that. So the way that it's delivered, and again, very, very cost effective. I think it's only £40 a pack, and anyone in school can facilitate that. So it doesn't need to be a teacher. It could be a TA. It could be anybody, any other member of support staff. They just need to do some quick training. It recommends that you do it with groups of 4 to 6 children. So it can either be targeted. So in the case of, I did it in the primary school, I did it with a year 4 group and a year 5 group, and we asked for them to be targeted. So we asked for the teachers to recommend to us children who had problems regulating emotion, or weren't very comfortable about expressing emotion, or the ones that teachers felt would benefit from, developing a bit more emotional literacy. And as I said, when I used it in year 7, I used it with children who were struggling with the kind of transition process of coming up to secondary school. It's a 6-week programme. It's an hour a week. The booklet's brilliant at giving you a lesson plan for each week, which you can follow. Again, it's not particularly rigid. You can follow it. Sometimes according to what's happening with the conversation and how the children take it, you can abandon the lesson plan and it would still be fine. You need very little in the way of resources: paper, pens, some straws, some balloons. But what you do need really is a kind of space. Or if you're playing it in a primary school, you could do it in a classroom, but you'd need to be able to move your tables and chairs around. But quite often primary schools have other little spaces that you can use. And then it comes with, as I said, full lesson plans, but it also comes with additional resources that you can use if you want to kind of track their emotional engagement or their emotional progress. Lots of lovely little charts with various emojis for emotions, where the children can chart how they're feeling. So the benefits that I have found from doing this, I've found many benefits from doing it. I would really, really recommend it. There are lots of different ways of playing it, different interpretations of how to play. It's quite a flexible game that can be moulded to the cohort. So, for example, with the first group that I used it with, a year 4 group, just coincidentally turned out to be a group of boys. We played it a bit more competitively because that's how they wanted to play it. That's how it kind of developed. But with the second group that I played it with, the year 5 group, who, again, coincidentally, we didn't plan it like this, turned out to be a group of girls. They weren't as interested in playing it particularly competitively. It wasn't the way that they really wanted to play it. So I just responded to that as I went along. It's not as competitive as some other games, although, like I've just said, you can play it competitively. It's more about developing that conversation, building a cooperative group dynamic. It's interesting. I had one boy in the year 4 group who he was in there because he liked he had trouble with peer relationships. He liked to dominate a situation. He liked to dominate a classroom, and he wasn't very good at listening and sharing. And you can see how perhaps you might end up with children who have some of those issues in a group like this. And it was interesting because the game doesn't let you dominate. So even though he came into the group wanting to continue with all of that behaviour, the game didn't let him do that, because it's very much about the cooperation. So that was really beneficial for him, because it allowed him, just within the dynamic of the game and how the game is set up, enabled him to learn some different skills. I think its power really is in its simplicity. It's a very simple game, and it does build in the children that ability to transfer their ideas of mental wellness from the characters to peers and then to themselves, which I think is a really powerful model of learning. Builds social confidence, it builds their peer relationships, it builds their ability to talk about their own emotions, talk about their situation, and discuss their personal worries. And again, that's very it's very different with each group, and what it does do is it also gives you the ability to then feed back to teachers if a child has disclosed something during a session, and you can feed that back to the teachers. Quite often it will be a piece of information the teacher didn't know, because again, as we've discussed, teachers are incredibly busy and don't always get to know the more pastoral side of what's going on with children and in their lives. So that's a really useful thing for it as well. Celebrates difference, and I think it really does give the children a language and an understanding and an acceptance of all emotions, and that all of the emotions, even the kind of ones that make us feel more negative or the more challenging emotions, are all okay. They're okay, and they're normal things to feel. So if you're going to do it, you just need to consider, I think, whether or not you're going to do it as a universal intervention or a targeted intervention. Both are absolutely fine. I think it's hugely beneficial for all children. And I think it would be a lovely thing if all primary school children were doing it at some point. It might be worth considering what it is you want to get out of it, what skills you'd like to develop in your children. But I would say be prepared to adapt, both during sessions and between groups, because you do need to be able to respond to the needs of the children and to respond to whichever direction the conversation goes in. I think there's some real opportunities to use it as a starting point for developing further work within schools, and certainly this is something that I have started to think about how we can develop it a little bit more at secondary school. So for example, you could, once you've played it once, you could get the children to teach other children how to play it, and that we know is a really valuable learning activity for children. Children can create their own beasties. One of the girls that I worked with in year 7 said to me that she would quite like to create a beastie that had problems with their siblings, or that fought with their siblings a lot, or that worried about their siblings. And I think she was of course bringing her own situation, her own experience to that. But I thought that was a really nice idea. There are suggestions along the way for various bits of happiness homework, which are, again, is a lovely activity, and something which we are working a bit more towards in my secondary school is that we have mental health ambassadors kind of throughout each year group. But certainly the way that I'm using this group of year 7 children that I did the intervention with is to use them to develop those student leadership skills, give them the opportunities to become almost like little mental health experts within the student body. And the other thing it does is it gives you opportunities, obviously, to gather student voice about how they're feeling about the skills and knowledge that they would like to know more of. And I've certainly felt that has come through very clearly with all the groups that I've done it with now, is that there is a real desire on their part to want to know more about mental health and to want to understand it a little bit more and understand why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. So this provides a really brilliant opportunity for that. And
sorry, Naomi,
anybody,
just
is
1
that
minute.
it? Am I done with time? Yeah, no, I'm at the end. That's fine. That's just the website there. If anybody wants more information, go to the website and have a look.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Sorry for cutting in there at the end.
No, that's fine.
If you had a few slides left, I didn't want you to bless you to keep going and then have me interrupting you all the way through. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I think we've probably all been taking note there of the website and how to get our hands on these. This is very exciting, affordable intervention that sounds like a lot of fun as well, and we all need a bit more of that, don't we, in our lives? So
it's all of those things.
Brilliant. Thanks, Naomi. I'm not going to take questions at the moment. I think if it's okay with everybody, we'll integrate those into our panel discussion later, and we can perhaps get some answers from everybody who's spoken today. It'd be really good. But thanks so much, Naomi. That was fantastic. Right, I think we're going to move on now to our, we've got a little interactive activity for everybody to take part in. So if we can have that up on the screen. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. Obviously, today the focus is on looking at the mental health and well-being of the children in our schools and how we can help them. We were also really mindful when we were talking about this event and planning what we were going to do that actually your mental health and well-being is really important as well. And our colleagues in school and our colleagues who are supporting children and families with their mental health and well-being. So we wanted to give you an opportunity to share with us how the cost of living crisis is affecting you and your colleagues, and particularly in relation to being able to carry out your role effectively. Just to obviously share what you want to share and hold back anything that you don't want to be discussed. But hopefully, I can't see it yet, but hopefully we've got a little word cloud activity where you can just.
I think Naomi, you're still sharing your screen because we've got double of everyone.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Thank you.
That's better. Thank you.
It was always going to be me.
That's okay. So I think Vera's got the poll.
And then we'll just give you a minute just to add some keywords or phrases, just to let us know how the cost of living crisis is affecting you and colleagues. Once that's up.
It's in the chat.
It's in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, I can't see the chat, sorry.
Okay, it's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat.
How is the cost of living crisis affecting the mental health and well-being of you and your colleagues in relation to your role?
Yes.
Thanks, Jonathan.
If you go into the chat and then you can all put your answer there and submit it.
Can everybody else see the chat? Mine's disappeared.
No, I can't. No, mine has too. That's why I've got my hand up.
Yeah, I'm afraid mine has too. Marie, is it possible for you to do this on screen? So as we've done in the past on events?
You won't be able to submit that way. Are you all on the chat tab along the top? You should be.
I haven't got a chat tab. It's disappeared.
You have either.
Okay, I have got a chat tab.
Judy's shaking her head too. And Maddie.
Is there all?
Okay, is it because I think it's because some have logged in through the Bearer Teams website and some have logged in through the link.
I'm just wondering if we could put a whiteboard up. Just thinking
that would be easier.
Yeah. Backup plan, doing online teaching and a whiteboard. Would that work? Can we get a whiteboard up and then people can just add on there?
We'll do it. Thank you.
Yay. Okay.
Cut and paste. So the question is, how is the cost of living crisis affecting? Oh, there we go. It's there. Mental health and well-being of you and your colleagues in being able to carry out your role effectively. So if you've got any notes there, any comments you'd like to share, then just type them in.
Maybe just a word or a couple of words that sort of sum it up for you.
Here we go. Got some appearing now, I think.
Thanks, Bearer colleagues, for getting that whiteboard set up so quickly. That's impressive.
Yeah, I think it's because you can click on the link or you can click and change to be logged in through Bearer because it asked me to switch when I logged in, and I think that's gives you full functionality. So maybe it's something we need to make sure we tell people when they're joining the system another time. So we've got buying food. Oh, the rest of it's behind the. Oh, there it is. Okay. Lack of staff. Cost of childcare. That's a big issue that's in the news this morning, I noticed. Yeah, and the issue of staff doing lots of social work rather than teaching. That seems to be on the increase. There's a big burden, and it's like Jonathan mentioned at the beginning, it's not necessarily what teachers are trained to do. Asking parents for direct debit contributions, gosh, that's a big one in this cost of living crisis, especially if you're talking about schools that Jonathan was talking about earlier. Budget cuts. Any more? Something appeared in the corner there that I can't see. Oh, doing more with less. Food bank for university students. And not having any capacity for interventions. So already fully stretched as far as you possibly can go, both with budgets and resources, staff resources, I guess.
That's interesting, isn't it? The sort of things that you're having to do in addition, but also then the things that you have to stop doing to try and manage, the current crisis that we're in. Really interesting.
And high anxiety all round. I guess that means the teachers, the non-teaching staff and the pupils, as well as the parents at home. So there's just a lot of anxiety going on out there.
I think we have students also who can't afford to travel to university because of the cost of living, and therefore having to make decisions about whether they can come in or whether they need to buy food. And I think also it's a really worrying time for young people because of the economic situation and the cost of living. People are worried about the future, aren't they, and what that will entail really.
Yeah, we've got a lot more students working
to
fund their studies than we've ever had before, and students with multiple jobs as well.
Yeah.
And again, that was reported on the BBC earlier this week, of people skipping lectures because they're going to earn money. I think we'll have to leave it there. I think there's some really interesting things there. I don't know if we can have that slide sent round afterwards to everybody. That would be really useful.
If we could save that, because I think we can pick up on some of these things in the panel when we open it up to a wider debate. Because I wanted to follow up on something about the thing with in higher education with students, the impact on students. But we can follow this up on the debate, because once we start talking, I think we could just carry on.
Exactly, so, and I'm very conscious that we're running a little bit behind time. So I'd like to now introduce our next speakers, which is Michelle and Jay. And they're going to talk about their collaborative project that they've developed at Roehampton University, and it's about digitalisation interventions for young adolescents. So Michelle and Jay, the floor's over to you.
Sure. Can you see my screen okay?
We can, yes. We just need to put it in full slide mode.
Okay, right. Is that better?
That's it. Yeah, got it.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Michelle Jamin. I introduced myself earlier. So as well as being a co-convener on the Mental Health Wellbeing Education SIG, I am here as one of the co-presenters of this final presentation for today, which is all about championing co-production, and that's developing effective mental health and wellbeing strategies in we're particularly looking at secondary schools here. But before I go on, I would like to pass over to my co-presenter, who will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name's Jay. I was recruited as the Young Person co-researcher for this project. I'm a recent graduate and very glad to be here with you today to contribute to this important discussion.
Okay, and now I can't seem to, oh, there we go.
So just to outline the basic structure of today's talk, our presentation is going to run through the following items. So we'll give a bit of background and context for our research, the nature and importance of co-production in research with children and young people, some information on what the Super Skills for Life social emotional intervention is, our participatory action research study on the feasibility of developing Super Skills for Life digital resources, and finally some conclusions and implications of our findings. I believe Michelle is just going to give some background and context.
That's right, my slides have stuck. Yep.
Can you go to the bottom and use that?
Thank you for online digital support, technological support. Okay, so I'm just going to start with some very brief background just to contextualize our study a little bit. So as we're all aware, the COVID-19 pandemic, it's had a profound impact on children's mental well-being globally. And we know that rates of emotional difficulties in particular, such as anxiety and depression, are on the rise. And although, as it's been said earlier, mental health was a public health concern before the crisis struck, early research on the effects of COVID-19 have identified that post-traumatic symptoms, along with increased levels of anxiety and depression, are more prevalent now. In fact, the United Nations has highlighted children particularly as a group, especially affected by mental distress. So it was interesting what Jonathan was saying at the top of the conference about how the research that's come out today has shown about how resilience has been is very a new sort of interesting fact that's come out. But when we look at particular groups and specifically children and young people, they have been highlighted as particularly affected by the pandemic. And also research suggests that previous inequalities have widened since the pandemic. So that effectively means that the most vulnerable and marginalized children and young people are facing even greater risk of mental health problems. And of course, on top of that, we now have the spiralling cost of living crisis. So this is adding an even greater burden for children and their families. And it's been predicted that the effects of this new cost of living crisis on public mental health will be on a scale similar to that of the pandemic. And some more worrying statistics have come out of an NHS digital report, and this is just from last November. And that showed that 13.6% of 7 to 16-year-olds with a probable mental health disorder said that their household could not afford to keep their home warm enough. And that was compared to about 6% of those without a mental health problem. And what's also been mentioned is how schools are increasingly seeing deprivation, evidence of deprivation in their schools. So we've got growing numbers of children coming in hungry, cold, tired, and those in the most deprived schools seem to be showing the most hardship. So in the most deprived areas. And another recent survey, which I think was the Sutton Trust, it found that 38% of teachers said a third of or more of their class were living in families facing considerable financial pressures. And they felt this was really impacting on children's ability to achieve in school. And this figure was highest in state schools with the most deprived intakes. And that sort of really resonates with what Jonathan was saying earlier. So schools, they're facing huge spending cuts. And of course, this sort of, toxic environment and this multitude of other pressures lots of competing priorities in schools environments, and this is having a major impact on the staff's own mental health and well-being, and that is across all levels of education. We've seen evidence from early years right the way through up to higher education level. So, looking at challenges and opportunities in this current context, which is a sort of perfect storm. So we know that in recent decades, mental wellbeing support, particularly in educational settings, has become a central focus for a raft of UK government policy, and Brona touched on some of that in the first presentation. So schools are now broadly considered ideal settings for interventions, for early interventions, and looking forward, the UK government has promised, I think it's around 400 mental health support teams to be in place this year to work particularly hand in hand with schools. But it seems likely that, you know, this is only going to have an impact on a proportion of schools in the UK. I think it's around a third. So it's only going to help around a third of England's pupils, leaving a whole raft of pupils in need. So meeting this escalating demand and providing timely and appropriate support, it's going to continue to be a huge challenge for many educators. So in this climate of high need, we've got limited access to resources. We really need to think smart. We really need to have some smart strategies to build back better mental wellbeing support. So one of the key things that has come out of all of the work that I've done in this area is really genuinely listening to children and young people. And children have traditionally been really seen as passive users of services, and that includes mental health and well-being, but they are the experts. They're, of course, the experts in their own lives, and so listening to them should really be at the heart of building back better mental health provision. So we know that the negative effects, of course, of the pandemic have been far-reaching, but there have also been some really important lessons that we have learnt in education. And so a lot of this is linked to the rapid acceleration of digital technologies. So how can we kind of extrapolate that and apply these lessons? So we found that remote delivery of mental health support during lockdown was linked to several benefits. And that included increased flexibility, easier access, and in particular for marginalised groups, such as LGBT+ youth. And there is also a mounting body of evidence which highlights the powerful role of social media. So alongside digital resources, how they can play an important role in encouraging healthy behaviours, and that's for both adults and youth. So this current study, was focused on looking at the feasibility of developing some original digital resources, which were adapted from a well-established evidence-based socio-emotional programme, the Super Skills for Life programme, which some of you may be familiar with. And the longer term goal of this was looking at how to extend the programme's reach and appeal to a digital generation of youth to help try and address and tackle this escalating demand. So I'm going to pass you back to Jay now. Hopefully my slide will move on.
So I know we're short of time already, but just some quick information about the Super Skills for Life programme. It's a brief manualised programme for 6 to 18-year-olds, typically delivered in school settings. It's based on cognitive behaviour therapy and is designed to enhance self-confidence, improve social skills and build emotional resilience. The Super Skills for Life adolescent version covers techniques to improve health, for example, having a nutritious diet, taking regular physical exercise, and maintaining good sleep hygiene. Another thing to note is that it has become a kind of worldwide program. Cecilia, one of the kind of founders for this intervention, has done some very exciting work with the Malaysian government recently and also in Turkey. So it truly is a global program at this point. If we could go on to the next stage, yeah. So our study was a participatory action research design, and young people were recruited from the local community as co-researchers. First, a small scoping exercise was undertaken to explore popular social media sites and existing mental wellbeing content readily available online. This data then informed the development of 12 Super Skills for Life digital resources, which I created myself as a young person co-researcher. A focus group of 10 young people was conducted to explore their current use and perceptions of social media, as well as to gather feedback on the sampled digital resources. So you should be able to see some screenshots of the 12 sampled digital resources here. So we've got a couple of infographics on the right, the stress bucket, and then the tile on understanding difference, as well as a sleep loop. So this was a TikTok video I created on the importance of sleep, and this is designed to seamlessly repeat. I also created a few expert interview videos, interactive shorts, animations, video poems, and then at the back we've actually got a digitalized version of the Super Skills for Life lesson based on a chapter in the workbook.
Okay, so what did we find? So as Joe mentioned, we did a preliminary scoping exercise, and from this it was found that TikTok, Instagram and YouTube were identified as the main social media content sharing platforms, and this aligns with wider research and surveys conducted by Ofcom. But what was interesting is we found that each platform was associated with different types of digital content. And this was used to help inform the development of the Super Skills for Life digital materials, and also identify the most suitable way to disseminate them. So, for example, TikTok was generally regarded the most popular for sharing user-generated content, and this type of content has become increasingly popular, particularly since lockdown. And it was also typically associated with a sort of short infographic type of content. And then that was kind of translated into looking at disseminating key wellbeing messages for Super Skills for Life. And Jay showed you that that screenshot of the sleep loop. And it's a shame we can't actually show that, but I don't know if we should mess around with the technology too much and try and put that on, but maybe we'll see if we can do that at the end. Okay, so yeah, and so on the other hand, something like YouTube, it was generally considered something that was you'd use to watch longer content, longer videos, other people's content, including talks by mental health professionals. And this was seen as a good vehicle for sharing the abridged Super Skills for Life workshop session. Okay, so I just quickly mention we did collect some quantitative data as well, which comprised of a rating scale, and so the participants rated the different digital resources on different aspects. We're not going to focus on that today because we are limited for time, and we're just going to give some highlights from the focus group findings. So in a nutshell, there were three main themes generated from the focus group data. They were it's complicated, which was about young people's relationships with social media. The second one was on perceptions and experience of support pathways. And the final one, cultivating mental health and wellbeing provision for a digital generation. Okay, so the first theme, and unsurprisingly, we found that all participants were avid users of social media, but young people showed quite mixed engagement with it, whereas some demonstrated quite high agency and were proactive in their decision making, in the type of content they selected and in their responses to it. Others reported much more passive behaviours, you know, things like sort of long periods of aimless scrolling. But of course, these behaviours were not mutually exclusive. Okay. And then young people were also very aware about the powerful influence of social media, and also their own ability, you know, how they themselves could influence peers and were influenced likewise through the use of likes and the following behaviours. But also, we found that participants showed they could be really discerning online consumers. They were aware of fake and untrustworthy sources of information. And although some were sceptical about looking for online solutions, others really valued the opportunity to connect with their peers from across the globe who were sharing their personal experience of similar issues and how to deal with them. Now, key relationships were really at the heart of support-seeking behaviours, and parents, teachers, siblings and friends were all identified as key sources of support. And we found that the primacy of friendships was quite universal, but interestingly, participants had really mixed views about the benefits and the availability of school-based support. But really pertinently, trust was really a key motivating factor for accessing support, whether that be offline or online. And again, in line with the wider evidence, young people were willing and interested in social media and digital tools for supporting their well-being. However, participants associated these different platforms with really quite distinct experiences. And so this influenced their patterns of usage and their perceptions regarding the most suitable platforms for different types of mental well-being content. And another example, we found that TikTok was universally popular and it wasn't associated with some of the more negative experiences that young people felt that they were exposed to on some of the other platforms, such as Instagram, which was really dominated by a culture of constant social comparison.
Feedback on the sample of digital resources identified several key ingredients associated with effective online content. So colour, music, humour, interactivity, these were all picked out by the participants as important for grabbing their attention. And once that attention was captured, they could be prompted to try activities such as a breathing exercise. Plus, there's also more of a likelihood that they would access additional content from that same source. Significantly, young people understood the global reach of social media and did see it as a natural vehicle for raising mental health and well-being awareness. Moreover, the participants were really conscious of their need for digital resources to be inclusive and reflect the diversity of a worldwide youth audience. So findings from this study, this exploratory study, showed that young people had strong views and high expectations about how social media content was packaged, and this was integral to whether material was viewed or swiped past. Intervention developers need to consider this carefully, bearing in mind the sheer amount of online content there is out there vying for young people's attention. The super skills sample resources, which most closely align to the preferences of young people, receive the most positive feedback. Findings also support the potential for social media images and videos to convey social norms and shape normative perceptions with respect to healthy well-being behaviours. Online developers should pay attention to how content is shared and perceived through the interplay of social media's interactive features.
Okay, so and just sort of finally, really, some comments around sort of linking back to this climate of high demand and overstretched services. Really, as researchers and alongside policymakers, we really need to explore innovative ways that we can provide timely and appropriate mental well-being support for our children and young people. And of course, this involves embracing traditional face-to-face services, but alongside these new emerging online options. And so this was just a small exploratory study, but the digital adaptation of evidence-based programs. We've heard of others earlier in the conference, but a lot similar to Super Schools for Life. This is sort of one promising solution, one possible way forward. And I really just want to finish on the importance of how engaging the intervention recipients, the children and young people themselves, at every stage of the research process, how that is so important, and is more likely then to generate effective and sustainable provision. So co-production must be at the heart, really, of developing mental wellbeing strategies which ensure that interventions are relevant, they're meaningful and effective. And this will enable children and young people not only to cope, but hopefully also to flourish. And just finally, if you were interested in finding out more about the Super Skills for Life programme, you can go to the Roehampton website. There's a link there, and there Jay mentioned about the international nature of the programme, and that's just some of the countries where Super Skills for Life is currently being delivered. And yeah, so that's it from us. So I'm going to try, without exiting myself from the meeting, to stop sharing the screen. Have I done that? No. Have I done that now? Great. Okay, it's a little bit confusing because I've got all sorts of things on my screen. And now what we're going to do is we are going to go straight, I think, seamlessly into our final session. And I just realized I can't see myself here anywhere. I'm sure I am here. But what I'd like to do is I would like to welcome our two guest panelists. First of all, so we've got Sophie and Jack, and I would just like them to briefly introduce themselves before we move into questions. Sorry, back in the room. So Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Sophie. I am currently studying at the University of Roehampton on psychology and counselling, coming very close to my dissertation period, so minor stress. I'm an ELSA lead at a secondary school and have been for the past 3 years, so a lot of the stuff you've all been talking about has just been really, really interesting. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's spoken already.
Thank you, Sophie. And Jack?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Jack Costello. I am the Deputy Principal and Designated Safeguarding Lead at Richmond Park Academy, and I lead on mental health provision across the Academy. I also work within Academy's Enterprise Trust as well, with the safeguarding team. So again, a lot of what's been said this morning really has resonated with me, and the experiences are very similar to what's been reported. So thank you, and I think it's fair to say we're all on the same page in terms of what the problems are and what's required to move forward.
Thank you. Can I just ask both of you to sort of kick us off by considering the question that was put to our audience in between the presentation? So can we get that whiteboard anywhere up again? I don't know if that will help. Yeah. Okay. So I wonder, I don't know, Sophie, if you want to perhaps give your thoughts on this first in terms of yeah, great.
Yeah, I actually put a couple of them in.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I put in about the budget cuts. I think I felt that firsthand. Suddenly noticed that a lot of budgets are not as big as they were, and that does affect kind of what kind of books or resources that we can buy. I'm having to be very practical with things that I'm using in ELSA and reusing a lot of things. So I've definitely felt that one personally in my job role. And then higher anxiety was actually me as well. That's just in general. I mean, that's a personal thing. With being sort of a younger generation, actually trying to find my feet on a housing ladder that's a general anxiety and worried, to be honest, about moving out of home and affording everything. As well as I feel like you can feel that in the school, in the students that are coming in. It just feels really relevant. And with the teaching staff as well, I think we've all got anxiety, lots of chats around not being able to put the heating on until a certain period of time. And it just feels so relevant.
I think you raised some really important points there about how this cuts across everything. It's cutting across obviously our experiences in education, but you know, it's our home, our personal lives, our family lives. So you know, everything is being affected. I was in a program board meeting yesterday, and students were saying about how it does seem, you know, there's this atmosphere that is quite dark and sad. And they were talking about you know, sort of even coming into university and finding you know, it's sort of a bit cold and miserable.
Yeah,
there is that yes, that sort of unfortunate kind of as I was talking earlier about this sort of atmosphere of real challenges, really difficult situations. And I guess, you know, we are here to talk, you know, recognizing these issues, but trying to look at how we are addressing these. And it was a very inspirational story from Jonathan at the start, and how schools are really pulling out stops to make a difference. But that is a massive responsibility on schools. And there is, of course, huge variation across the country, and schools are very complex places, very different in the resources they have, in you know, the staff and capacity. And there are really, you know, and it's patchy out there. Jack, can I kind of pass that same question on to you to before we open it up to sort of wider debate?
Yeah, I think there's lots of angles to address this from, and I think everyone's right in saying it's not just one factor. It's this combination of lockdown, of the cost of living, social isolation, you know, society, and some of the social anxieties that people have, and also you know, cultural issues. There's a whole range of things that are contributing to this. I think in terms of what we've seen is we've seen a really significant increase in mental health concerns, as everyone else has reported already. But for us, CAMHS referrals have gone up. The number of students reporting self-harm has gone up. The amount of from our assessments, students' self-disclosure at school is much lower than it was previously. So they're not sharing their true selves or their true feelings with people in school, and that means that they're feeling more isolated, more cut off, and without those low-level interactions that we have in school every day and breaking down those barriers, people feel more isolated, and things that are a big deal at the best of times are becoming greater and more of a barrier to learning, to attendance, to seeking help. So that's been a big change. We've also reported a lower trust of others in school as well. So students not necessarily trusting adults at school or at home as well, to be able to support them. We've got over 24% of our students over-regulate, which means for us that every interaction that they have during the day is an effort, and that takes a mental toll in terms of exam anxiety, that every time you talk to someone, that's putting further emotional strain on you, and that's resulted in more external referrals, more social service referrals. From a positive perspective, though, knowing this information, understanding, I feel that we're in a much better position, that we can access more support, both online, through our local authority, through our sponsors as well, our school sponsor, our AET Trust, and that the conversation is out there now that it's okay not to be okay. I think the shift in society to talk about mental health is really positive, and we're not there yet. But if you think of where we were 10 years ago about talking about self-harm or mental health, we've come a really long way. So I think there's positive growth there and positive shoots moving forward. I agree with what you discussed about staff. Staff are feeling it as well, and it's becoming reality, and we're all having those conversations with each other, and we're all a bit scared about paying our bills and what's happening next. And I think there is a sense of isolation, but also that everyone else is going through it too. So I think that resilience that we talked about earlier is certainly there, but the most vulnerable people are the ones that need the most support, as always. Yeah, and I guess we talked earlier about cultural capital, and for us, making sure the opportunities that everyone gets, it doesn't matter where you're from or what your mental health status or your attendance status, or whether your parents, the students' parents have poor mental health, which we're seeing an increase in reports of those as well, that every student, no matter where they're from, gets the same opportunities to attain well, to have good progress, and to have those opportunities for cultural capital experiences too. So loads there, I know, to unpick, but I certainly agree with everything that's been said so far.
Great, thank you. Yes, like you say, loads to unpick there. And I think you make an important point about how, yes, we talk more about mental health and well-being, and certainly we are hearing more. I work in higher education, and I have a lot of students who sort of disclose issues that they're experiencing. But I think where's the big gap is having timely and appropriate support, which I mentioned earlier, that is across all levels. So we need to, address that. I know it's a huge challenge, and everyone is out there, working towards it and trying to do that. So, I mean, on that note, really, Brona did mention about mental health support teams. Do you want to bring that into the debate here? So we'll see. Your experience wasn't so positive, you said. So do you want to unpick that a little bit and tell us, and maybe other people can then respond who have also had experience?
I think there's been a real problem with recruiting and particularly retaining staff, because of the way the project's been set up, because workers are recruited and they do a training course, but then they're looking for the next thing to move on to. And certainly, and this is reflected in the Birmingham report, there have been struggles to hold on to things. But I think one of the big issues for schools has been the type of referrals that the mental health support teams will accept. And those schools that have got an MHST are very often saying, well, we thought they would take this child, but they're saying they don't meet the criteria. So what do I do? I'm back where I started. And clearly one of the roles for the MHSTs was to try and facilitate access to other support. But it seems to be some schools are finding that the child's just been bounced back to them, and they have to do the same loop through whatever the local authority access route is for CAMS. Some of the workers have been brilliant. I've had some really positive feedback from parents, but interestingly, reluctance in some areas for parents to accept the support from the MHST, and reluctance from some of the MHST staff to get involved with parents. So it'll be interesting to see what's happening elsewhere. But I had huge hopes for it. I thought it was going to be the answer to all our problems, but clearly there's a bit more work to be done.
I think Jack wanted to respond.
Yeah, we were involved in Trailblazers, and we have the mental health service come into school as well. And I concur with your opinion on it's red tape really is the biggest issue. What we'd ideally like to see is this student struggling with this, do a short referral form, and then within 2 or 3 weeks there's someone seeing them and supporting them. But sadly, because they're clinical, they have to follow all of their processes down to the letter, which means it's a probably 4 or 5 week referral process. They have to contact the parents. We have to gain permission. Then by the time it starts, it's really good when it does start and when it's going, but there's so much gap in between, and the thresholds are so high for them to be able to support. And actually, if they're too high, then they have to go to CAMS, and they can't. The window for them to intervene, I see it as really small. And actually, we've found even better support through. We have a local charity that works with us, and they will see someone the week after and do a girls session, a boys session, based on, and be really flexible with it. But I don't think the mental health team are able, because of their structure, to be flexible for the lower level students that we need the support. We're lucky we have a full-time school counsellor at school. We have a big safeguarding team. We've got really good pastoral systems. But even with all of that support, there's still the demand outstrips the provision that we've got. So that's the barrier that we've seen. I'm not sure if you feel the same.
I think Lindsay wanted to say something. Apologies, I've got a rather unusual screen, so I've got lots of things on my screen which aren't particularly useful, but I don't have the chat. So if one of the other chairs can see the chat, can you see any questions coming in, and can I sort of hand over for anyone to pick up on any questions that are coming in the chat, because I don't have it, unfortunately.
It's okay, Michelle, there's nothing in the chat at the moment. So if people
Oh.
continue to put their hands up, I think that's probably the best way to go. And then everyone's got access to who wants to ask a question.
Excellent. So please, Lindsay, I think you had your hand up if you wanted to respond. And then, of course, anyone who wanted to ask a question to any of the speakers, please do go ahead, and to our panelists. So, Lindsay.
Okay, hi. I'm a programme leader for the training of education mental health practitioners, and worked very recently with Professor Peter Fonagy on the curriculum refresh. So I think it would be really useful if someone in this group could maybe coordinate. It can't be me because I've been on the curriculum thing and on that MHST sort of side of things, but to feed in these sorts of comments, because Peter's writing the reflections on the initial 10 waves. So the last group of trainees will start next January, and the report's being written now to look at future funding, future directions and such like. So if there is a way that you could collate those feedbacks, what's worked well and even better if, just as a simple framework, I'd happily act as a go-between with Peter, unless anybody here has got that link. But to get the voices heard of people who haven't necessarily been involved in the more formal trailblazing and have just experienced it generally would be really, really useful, because you're all right, there has been a dominance from the NHS side of things. I'm seeing a shift in the meetings that I go to in the leadership within the teams, but the voice of schools and educators needs to be heard more. So if you can get that together, I'd really recommend it.
Well, we could try to help facilitate that. So would you be able to just email one of us, one of the conveners, your contact details, and then we can just try and coordinate that.
I work with Jonathan at the same university, so we
can.
can.
Oh, right, okay, that's easy.
Okay.
Is Jonathan, sorry, I know Jonathan had to leave early to go. Is he still
he's
here?
gone. He's gone.
He's gone. Okay.
Yeah,
it's okay. I'm volunteering for this. I do it for other things as well. But yeah, if you're coordinating through Jonathan, then I can sort that out. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thanks very much, Lindsay. I think Claire had their hand up. Claire.
Hello, yeah, just to really add on to what people have been saying, we train senior mental health leads in schools across England, and what we're finding is that schools are having a very, very mixed experience. Some schools like rave about their mental health support team, say that they're absolutely amazing, so supportive. They are supporting the school in doing an audit. They're organising regular network events between the senior mental health leads and mental health professionals. And then other schools are saying, we're so disappointed because we refer and they get bounced back. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the staff. There's a high turnover of staff. And I think one of the biggest problems, like when we're talking to schools sort of nationally, is the inconsistency. There doesn't seem to be any kind of uniformity about it at all. And it is like potluck and almost like a postcode lottery. And I think that that's the kind of thing that really needs to be fed back as well.
No, that's a really important point, and I think that's very much what's coming out is the fact that it is patchy, and there's some excellent pockets of good practice going on across the country, and I think some of what we hope to do through this forum is to share some of that. Any other comments? Any other sort of responses to what we've said so far, or do you anyone want to bring up another point? Anthea.
Yeah, it was just interesting in Bowen's presentation at the beginning that the white British children come out as one of the highest groups. You talked about some of the reasons for that. It would be really interesting to know more about that, wouldn't it? It might be that the understanding, it could be stigma. It could be that within their communities, mental health has often been stigmatized in some of these communities, and it still is. So if it's not talked about amongst the adults, it's certainly not going to be talked about amongst the children, and they are going to, so they come to your quiet children that you're not going to notice. So maybe that's something that we should all be paying more attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. Could I just ask our young people on the panel just about their experience, because we've talked about how it is important to get the views of the recipients of interventions and support. What has been your experience of that? Did you find that you have been able to be involved? Were your views sought, or do you feel that, you know, pretty much, and what was available to you? Was there very much support when you were going through education? So I know, Sophie, you still are, and Jay, you've recently left, but that would be really sort of, I think, interesting to hear from your first-hand experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't needed, well, I haven't sought any support probably till I got to third year, because I think the pressure just goes through the roof. But when I've reached out for support, the support provided by the university has been really good. I was booked in for counselling really, really quickly, which surprised me. And they've also just put in something called a student engagement coach, which has just quietened a lot of the noise in my brain, where someone's just come in and said, I will help you just structure the learning up until you leave, and I can help you with all of that. So that's been really, really useful. I would say the 2 years prior, that kind of support hasn't been in place. This student engagement coach seemed to come out of nowhere. Probably could have used it, to be honest, in the first couple of years, especially in the transition period of starting university. That can be quite overwhelming in itself.
Because we are aware that there are particular points through the education journey where, you know, children and young people are more vulnerable. And were you aware of what was available in school? So if we're talking sort of going back a few years, that just because what was interesting that came out of our research was it was very patchy. Some students were saying, yeah, school's great, and others were saying, no, I wouldn't go to anyone in school. I don't know what's available, if anything's available.
When I was at school, I can't think of anything. I don't remember having any support when I was there. What's that? Sort of 10, 15 years back at secondary school. I'd never heard of ELSA until someone cornered me on a stairwell and said, oh, I think you'd be really good as an ELSA. And I was like, oh, I'm not good at literacy. I was thinking, I don't know what this is. Yeah, so that support really wasn't, for me, I had no idea about it going back even 10, 15 years. I think there has been a lot more progress. I mean, coming from the other side of it and now being able to provide an intervention, I think it's brilliant what we can offer now. It's just such a shame there's so few of us and the budget is so limited of training people. It would just be amazing to have a load of us, but.
No, absolutely. And thank you very much for sharing that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Jay, or.
Just from my university experience, I was very lucky. I didn't need to actively rely or seek out mental well-being support, but I do know from friends they had to spend weeks on waiting lists to try and see someone. And I think the biggest thing is that at my university, at least, it's kind of a very passive approach to supporting students' well-being. It wasn't very clear where to go to, and it was therefore very easy for students just to take on all the responsibility themselves. They would have to deal with the problems that they were having to go through alone, and didn't feel like there was any point in reaching out to the university because it would be too difficult. They didn't really know what help was available, and they felt that actually it was actually pretty normal to be feeling not great about the way that their studies were going, or if there were kind of external home life situations, that was just kind of something for them to be getting on with. The university weren't going to help.
Thank you, Jay, for sharing that. And I hope that, you know, now there is more awareness, universities are doing more, and lower down the education, because we've got representatives here, obviously from primary school and secondary school. I think we've got one more question, and I think I'm going to have to hand it over to wrap up after that. So we've just got, Maddie, did you want to comment or be the last question?
I was just going to say it depends on the university. We have an awful lot of support in our university, and we don't have any waiting lists for counselling. I think, you know, and this is the important thing about ideas about budget cuts. We need to make really sure that this is really high up on everybody's priority list, because it's a thread running through education in general that young people and children are struggling, and we just need to carry on this kind of events, flagging it up, because hopefully at some point government will notice. That's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you. And I think you make a really important point there. And what we've been talking about is hopefully is raising awareness, sharing good practice, just shouting loudly about prevention. We need more preventative interventions. There are excellent pockets of good practice, but as I say, we need to share that. We need to get those voices out, and we need to involve children and young people across the board to help us, you know, get this right. I'm going to pass over to Anthea and Amy, who are just going to do some closing points, because we're rapidly running out of time. And I know we could probably carry on this discussion, and we will, you know, we'll keep the conversation going, but that's enough for me. So Anthea or Amy, I don't know which one of you is going to sort of pick up to close.
Yeah, well, I'll start. I think you've covered quite a lot of it, Michelle, in those last few remarks. I mean, I think what is shown today is the situation that everybody's in is a perfect storm, and you mentioned it yourself. When you look at everything that's going on, you're very lucky if you can avoid some of these stresses and strains, and especially if you're working in education in any level of education at the moment, you're going to be under some of these strains and stresses that we've talked about. I think the importance of using digital interventions for young people and social media, and again, bringing in the young people so that we know what's relevant for them, because what we think is relevant and what they think relevant are often two very different approaches. And it's quite clear from what everyone said today that young people want more about mental health. They want to know more. They want to know more how to manage it, and they want to know more how not to get into trouble from it, how not to affect their opportunities, and what they can do to have a more, maybe we should start talking a lot more about positive mindsets and about growth mentality and about moving forward. And I think there's a great importance on listening to the young people and evaluating everything that we do, so that we can see what is working and what isn't working, and taking that learning and making sure we're all talking to each other, so that everyone's not reinventing the wheel. And clearly the message is still not getting through to quite a lot of schools. I mean, certainly I know secondary schools in very poor areas that are definitely not working the way that Jonathan described this morning. I think we can promote the importance of low-cost interventions. I think there are low-cost interventions in there with high impact that don't take a lot of training, that don't take a lot of time and energy, but that can be very effective for the young people. And it seems all these interventions, really what you're giving the young people is time and space to talk about their feelings. And the curriculum at any level is so driven by targets. And I know there are secondary school teachers now that are not allowed to go off script, you know, with what they have to deliver. There is no room there's no space in the classroom to have these conversations. So it's really important that the children that are struggling, and often there's no space at home for these conversations, because parents, particularly in some areas and some communities, are dealing with their own challenges and difficulties. And I think just continue to share good practice and to share what's going on, and push for the national discussion on what we're finding. But I think there is hope in there. And I think that's one thing we've seen. If you get the right interventions in there and the right people to deliver those interventions, there is hope for both the schools and the young people within them. I don't know, Amy, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. That was a brilliant summary, Anthea. I just wanted to thank everybody so much for coming and for your contributions. And I think what I've taken away from today is that it's very easy just to keep your head down and try and cope with everything that's coming at you, and try to take on all that care and responsibility ourselves for what's going on around us. And actually, there are systemic issues that we can't address on our own, and it's so important that we come together, we have these discussions, we don't feel alone with it. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming together today and taking the time to share your experiences and your ideas and strategies. And yeah, thank you very much for coming. Keep in
we hope to
touch.
carry on the conversation as part of the SIG. So if anyone's got any questions or anything, then do feel free to email us, or any points about the presentations. Michelle, do you want to say a final word?
Just a final word to say thank you very much. It's been, a really interesting morning. I've loved hearing from other speakers and hearing your comments, and thank you to our panelists. And if you are interested in any of those interventions, please feel free to either email me, or if you've taken details from the presentation slides, and any ideas you have for future conferences you'd like us to host, please do get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.